Hi everyone, welcome back to the Health Tech video series for episode 12. I am Ariel Rothman, and I'm excited to be hosting this panel with Etugo Nwokah, Managing Director and Partner at BCG. We have two incredible panelists here today to discuss pharmatech. Nandini Nayar is the Global Digital Health Lead of Patient Experience at Sanofi, and Geoff Chaiken is the founder and CEO of Blink Health. Thank you both for joining. I'll pass it off to Etugo to begin the discussion.
Thanks, Ariel. Excited to have you both on today. We're going to be talking about pharmacy tech, and the way I'd love to sort of start this conversation is really in the backdrop of a couple things. So, Follow the Pill was a white paper written maybe 30 years ago that really talked about all the incredible complexity as it relates to the pharmaceutical supply chain. And the fact of the matter is not a lot has changed really since then. It continues to be a complex industry with a lot of different intermediaries in between, from pharmacy benefit managers to wholesale distributors, all the way to pharmacies, manufacturers, and the like. And so excited to talk about and jump into the first question, which is really, as we think about how technology continues to advance, yet a very complex system here, when we think about the complex journey of drugs, all the way from manufacturers to patients, how do you think about the technology disrupting the economic flow? And specifically, as you think about the different types of drugs, if we're talking about just small molecule ibuprofens, all the way to sort of your injectables and specialty drugs. So maybe Nandini, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, happy to get started. So yeah, I'll be approaching this, of course, from a pharma perspective, but also from the perspective of all the challenges patients face, right? From kind of getting a script to actually getting the product in hand. So yeah, and tech is, just undoubtedly changing kind of who's adding value across the flow and who gets to keep it. So I guess, yeah, for generics, I don't need to tell you, right? The likes of, GoodRx and, Cost Plus, using tech to really drive transparency into prices and, of course, capturing some of the value in the process. I think, specialty light is where it gets really interesting, right? Where we're seeing, alternative pharmacy channels like, Blink, PhilRx, non-dispensing pharmacies, driving what I think is really just a vastly superior patient experience, right? By automating what traditionally, paper-based processes, and really delivering that kind of that Amazon-like experience that we've come to expect in all other aspects of our lives, right? While creating transparency for pharma into that end-to-end flow from kind of that point of script to the point of actually dispensing, right? So, when you know all your reasons for leakage, right? Is it because it's a high copay, or, because a pay wasn't submitted? As pharma, you know what your levers are to optimize that, right? And I think it's, pharma seeing the value in such players and choosing to partner more with such players that is kind of shifting value away from, some of the traditional hubs, retail and, other specialty pharmacies in the space.
Fundamentally, what the challenge is from a patient experience perspective, and for pharma, actually for all of the constituents, is that you have what we call a retrospective transaction, which is that neither the patient or the physician know what the price of the medication is or what the experience of the medication is until that patient effectively gets to the pharmacy counter. So what typically happens is, whether at a retail situation, the patient will get to the pharmacy counter, one of three things will happen. They'll find out that either there's a PA that's required, and so they can't get their medication. It's a price that they can't afford, even when there is a great savings offer that's been put in place by the manufacturer. It's not getting pushed to the patient. Or for launches, and we live in, like, there were 50 launches last year, the pharmacies won't hold the inventory until they can see the demand. And so that creates a tremendous amount of friction for the patients. And so what you see companies like Blink doing is trying to move this transaction online in a way that solves all of those problems. And so effectively what we do, and most of Blink today is what we call Blink RX. It's not actually Blink Health, is we'll partner with those manufacturers and allow their commercial teams to communicate to physicians. Not only do we have the best science for our product, but we have the best access. All you have to do is send that prescription to Blink RX, which is basically in the cloud. And then the experience that a patient has is that we're able to figure out their insurance coverage without asking them. We're able to figure out their copay right on the fly. We're able to push all the assistance that's available out there, so they don't have to go look for it. And then within a few minutes, right while they're in the doctor's office, send them a text message with the price of that medication. No referral form involved, no paperwork involved. And then what ends up happening is the patient sees that price. They don't have to go, they see that it's affordable, and they get free home delivery. And what you basically find is that if you provide transparency, so the patient never shows up at the pharmacy counter again and finds out that it's something they can't afford, if you push them up the lowest price because you've aggregated all the savings offers so it's affordable, and if you provide the convenience of home delivery so that if they're sick and they can't make it to the pharmacy, it's just very convenient for them, you give them that convenience, we see sort of over a doubling of the number of scripts per patient. And so it sort of seems almost too good to be true, but it's actually quite intuitive. And it's not necessarily that we're so good, it's just that the status quo is so challenging. And so that is, I think what technology enables, and it's not a changing of the or disrupting the economic flows. It's actually reorganizing the information flows to give patients and doctors that information much faster and in a more convenient fashion. But everyone's winning if these patients are actually taking medications they need to be on.
That's great. And I think you touched on a few key themes in terms of if you think about the patient experience, and both of you have deep experience in this, whether it's in your growth stage companies or now larger companies at Sanofi. And when we think about building that trust with the consumer, these things come to mind, right? So the trust around, can you be transparent? How transparent can you be around pricing and the process, convenience, affordability, some of these other sort of Amazon effects that folks like to use. Thinking about that and taking it maybe a step further, Geoff, you covered a number of these as you were describing just the traction that Blink has, which is phenomenal. As you think about specific challenges that you've overcome, and also thinking about the challenges that we need to continue to tackle as it relates to scaling the pharmacy model beyond just the retail brick and mortar. Maybe Nandini, how do we think about that?
Yeah, I think, as with any kind of new innovative approach, right, there's a number of challenges, right, with kind of actually making the shift happen. So in this case, I'm kind of just focused on the alternative innovative pharmacy approaches that we're talking about here. If your model is direct to patient, right, your customer acquisition costs are just something to be figured out, right? And to the extent that you're relying on your pharma partnership or your pharma reps, right, or your HCPs to drive volume to this channel, well, behavior change is always hard, right? Even if you can make the case that the economics are better, right? So it takes a lot of investment in HCP and rep education, and in some case even changing incentive structures, right? It's the right thing to do, but got to navigate that shift around behavior change to what we all know is a superior channel, right? I think also probably from a retail perspective, right? I think much has been said and written about this. Retail, of course, has a lot of challenges, right, including kind of shrinking footprint. But consumer trust in retail can be high, right? And consumers go to these pharmacies for a number of reasons, right? Increasingly including primary care, right? So and retail's figuring out, right, what is the product mix and pricing for it. So direct to patient approaches, they have a ways to go, right, to catch up here.
I think that the biggest challenge, there's one thing if you look at these digital pharmacy applications, and we're not really a traditional pharmacy, we sort of are a cloud that sits on top of the supply chain, but how patients get their medication. They actually, from a front end, look pretty similar. And I would say that that's actually the easy part. The hard part, in our case, is we've launched blockbuster products where we're you're talking about acquiring millions of patients a year. And so how do you actually process that level, that number of prescriptions is actually the real challenge. So it's not just how you do this at a small scale, it's how do you do this at like massive scale. The challenge that we have, though, getting to sort of the fundamental transaction is that the transaction occurs today as a workflow within those pharmacies. You have an individual that has to know how to process every aspect of a prescription. And as a result of that, that's actually a very highly skilled labor that's required and very expensive and very hard to scale. So you see across the country, we have a pharmacist shortage we have pharmacy technician shortage, you have pharmacies cutting hours. It's a huge problem. And so we recognize that if you wanted to just create this better experience, you couldn't just do it on the front end. You have to do it you have to fundamentally change the back end of how a prescription is processed so that you can actually scale. And what that basically meant was taking this workflow, which is how a prescription is processed, and actually turning it into an assembly line. And when you turn it into an assembly line, there's over 83 steps that can occur along the process of processing a prescription. It's what Henry Ford did. You can actually take the cost of processing a prescription down by 80 to 90%. And what you can also do is, rather than having to hire someone who knows how to build the whole car, you just need to hire someone who knows, or that you need to teach how to do the door handle or one very specific task along that assembly line. And so what that then allows you to do is really scale infinitely, which is what we're able to do.
As we think about just the opportunity there, I think there's an important point that you teased out, and you were mentioning just in terms of the patient experience as we think about driving behavior change and ultimately delivering on outcomes, but not just thinking about it as a superficial front end, and where does that integration point between the technology actually reach the patient? It's all the other stuff behind the scenes that you have to sort of think about as it relates to the end-to-end workflows, and really streamlining that in a way that makes sense and actually can deliver value such that, and to your point, Geoff, physicians, pharmacists can practice at the top of their license. And that's really the goal ultimately, where you have the experience. And I think one of the things to also keep in mind is, as we think about the technology, right, it doesn't completely replace all those scenarios. There's situations where patients want to talk to a human, right, want to interact more with an individual pharmacist in their local zip code, in their town, et cetera. So maybe as a follow-on to that, maybe one question I would throw out and ask you both as a follow-up there is, do you think that there are too many intermediaries currently within the end-to-end system? Or do you think that there's opportunities to just drive more efficiency within the system overall, as it relates to where we started, which was getting the manufacturer, getting the drug all the way to the patient?
My approach to being an entrepreneur is I have to accept the system as it exists. And the system is overly complicated, which we sort of mentioned before, but it is what it is. And our goal is to create the best experience for patients and physicians and manufacturers and payers, all of the key constituents that are out there, with the cards that we've been dealt.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, and I'm actually fairly kind of optimistic about, the extent to which players like Blink, at least in the specialty light space, right, can address a number of these challenges that we're talking about, right? I think the barriers are kind of the limits to growth are, yes, to some extent regulation, and some of the points I was making earlier, right, around adoption and what is it going to take for us to actually shift more volume to these channels, right, as a collective.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think we're kind of almost there with at least in the specialty light space with what we have in the innovation in the space.
Yeah, and just to follow that thread with the sort of last question is really around the regulatory environment. How do we think about technology really leveraging that to navigate sort of the complex regulatory environment that we're in? And are there other ways in which we can think about driving innovation through those sort of unlocking some of those regulatory changes?
I'm not optimistic about regulatory changes. Like, I don't think any entrepreneur should build their business on the assumption that the regulations are going to change. As I sort of said before, I think that you have to operate within the system that exists. And the good news is that we have enough of there are enough opportunities, and it just requires this massive investment to figure out what's going on. And what our view is that, and we have a few products that are at scale in healthcare, is that the challenge to building great product in any industry is you kind of need to understand the incentives of your consumer, and you have to understand the incentives of the folks who are in the environment as well. And the problem with this space is that you have to peel the onion sort of 10 more layers than in almost any other area of the economy, and it's not very transparent what those incentives are. So what we like to say is, like, when you want to join Blink, like, you have to be willing to peel that onion, and often when you peel it, you want to cry. So it takes a certain group of people who are willing to do that, who enjoy that actually. And there are a few companies that is, you know, they don't mind peeling that onion.
I might approach that from a slightly different angle, right? So yeah, I think, you know, an area where tech and I think regulation is already pushing the boundaries relates to the whole prior auth process, right? So I think, you know, you all probably know better than me, right? You know, overburdened practices often don't have the time to complete these PAs, and patients are just left waiting, right? There's a real opportunity here for these tech-enabled pharmacies to streamline this process, right? And, you know, looking to the future, right, I think further unlocks will come from regulation, right? That is really kind of, you know, pushing the envelope on what information is made accessible to these players like pharmacies to complete these PAs, and also to what extent they can actually submit, right, these prior auths and actually relieve the burden from these practices. And of course, also, you know, on the whole kind of peer interoperability front, right? I think this would really help unlock the potential for, you know, Gen AI, for example, to complete PAs, right? If the requirements are made more available, right, in structured form. And of course, from a pharma lens, right? Of course, one area that I'm very excited about is the potential for AI-driven patient services. And of course, this is, of course, has massive regulatory implications, right? So we've seen a lot of, you know, we've seen AI free up a lot of time for customer service reps and many other industries, while helping them build stronger relationships. Of course, there's a lot more complexities in our space, right? But kind of the very real potential for AI-driven patient services, regulation permitting, to help patients really kind of, you know, navigate those challenges with, you know, getting on and staying on therapy.
Sounds great. Well, I think we're up on time here. There we go.
Oh, that was a perfect
Thank you all so
timing.
much for joining. Really
Thanks,
appreciate the
Ariel.
comments.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Etugo.